Israeli government toward the Palestinians, especially in the West Bank. But having said that, I think it is also clear to put into a proper perspective the fact that in the Middle East, the situation is not just good guys and bad guys. If Israel is wrong in its treatment of the Palestinians, we must also look at what the Arab countries in that region are doing as well. Ask ourselves if there are very many vestiges of democracy, of human rights. Ask ourselves why billionaires who run governments, who talk about their concern for the hungry and desperate Palestinians, presumably their brothers and sisters, are not so quick to follow their words with dollars. So I think in terms of the Middle East, the truth of the matter is very, very sadly, for many reasons, you have a difficult situation there. Israel has done many wrong things. Certainly, the Arab countries deserve their share of the blame and the responsibility as well. Okay, I wanted to very briefly touch upon my views of the Persian Gulf, and I guess I don't have the time to do it, other than to say the Persian Gulf problem has got to be, is a complicated issue, to say the least. And I think it has to do with a couple of facts. One, the continuation of our support for sheiks and kings who are out of touch with their people. But second of all, the understanding that Saddam Hussein is not a nice guy. That's the simple truth. My position, in a nutshell, is to support a defensive action, military action, to support economic pressure, diplomatic efforts to stop this guy who, in my view, should not be allowed to control the Middle East. I think the military forces, of which the United States should be a part, should exist under the United Nations. I am deeply concerned about the massive buildup of troops in that region. Absolutely do not want to see the United States invade Iraq and get involved in a Vietnam-type war in the Middle East. I think we can win our goals, get the retreat of Iraq from Kuwait, free the hostages, and stop his aggressive posture through economic means, through diplomatic means, and by a shared military presence under the United Nations. I think it may not happen tomorrow. It may take a while. But I think if we persist, we will win and gain our goals, and there will not be a war in that region. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I, too, would like to thank Temple Sinai for arranging this forum this evening, and to Dave Scheinman for carrying out the details of getting in touch with us and getting it all straightened. I'd like to just take a minute or so to give you a little background about myself and why I am interested in this subject. For nearly a decade now, I have been coordinating and teaching in a course on Third World Studies, the University in Third World Development, as a matter of fact. And that led into my interest in Africa and into the Middle East. And about 7 years ago, when I was researching a paper for a national conference on South Africa and our relationship with South Africa, it was when I came upon the connections between Israel and South Africa. And so the paper expanded into our situation here concerning racism, the racism in South Africa, and the racism in Israel. When I gave that paper, I was told right afterwards, and it was at the plenary session of this conference, that it was a dangerous thing to do because academics cannot talk about Israel and the American relationship. And at that time, there was a case at SUNY Stony Brook where a professor who was up for tenure was under fire. He didn't get tenure. The faculty and the administration supported his case, but Governor Cuomo and the Board of Regents, apparently, of New York State stepped in. And that was very alarming, not to me as an individual, because I didn't have that sense of alarm at that time, but over the period of time, it was alarming from the standpoint of academic freedom. So I'm so very pleased that we can have this kind of a discussion during a political debate of a very important topic which touches on all of our lives and touches on so many individuals' lives around the world, not just because of the Middle East, but because of the way we interact and treat each other here and between countries and within other countries also. So for that reason, it was in mid-July, July 19th, that I called a press conference and presented a statement, U.S. Policy in the Middle East, Silence in the Face of Oppression. And that was because we had just terminated our discussions with the PLO again, and I knew that the situation in the Middle East was a tinderbox, and I believe in people talking to each other rather than hitting each other over the head. And at that time I said that Gorbachev had been able to make headway in the Soviet Union solutions with Lithuania and the other countries. At that time, President de Klerk was making headway in South Africa. Mandela was released and so forth. And somehow George Bush had not been able to handle the situation with Israel and Palestinians very well. And so I said we needed to do something, and that something was to bring sanctions against Israel unless they came to a UN-sponsored peace conference. And that was in mid-July. Within 2 weeks, we were involved because Saddam Hussein, who is definitely brutal, there's no question about it, and we tolerated that brutality when we supported him in the Iran-Iraq war, and we knew that he had used chemical warfare on his own people then, but that was a couple of years ago. We were able to live with it. Then all of a sudden, the great Texas bailout, or lies we tell ourselves, is what I called my next press conference on August 8th. And I said at that time that 45 years ago, the United States had dropped the first atomic bomb on human targets. And now with research, we're finding that that was not necessary. We know that the Japanese were ready to surrender. And really, President Truman was really telling the Soviet Union, we have this bomb and we'll use it. And so I said at that time, it was a spin doctor's opportunity to turn our attention from the SNL crisis with Neil Bush should be jailed posters in Washington at that time, and the need for Texas to be bailed out. Because as you know, what's good for OPEC is good for Texas, Louisiana, Alaska, and Oklahoma. Then, August 13th, I had another press conference where I said desert sacrifice and voracious oil consumption because we hadn't let the ink dry on the unprecedented support for the UN economic sanctions against Iraq. We had already started to send in our troops. And that fear that those troops would then be killed, and the peoples of that area killed, so that we could save a few cents at the gasoline pump. I believe in talking first. I don't believe in hitting first. That's what the United Nations is for. And during the Reagan years, for a decade, we didn't pay our UN dues or paid a small portion of them. And as you know, we backed away and even suggested under Jeane Kirkpatrick's leadership that perhaps it would be better if the UN even left New York. When the UN in the last couple of years has been able to raise its image a little bit by settling the Iran-Iraq war, we have come back a little bit. We need to be right in there, and I feel that we should have utilized UN forces to be in Saudi Arabia. It's appropriate under UN Charter, Chapter 7, as well as Article 51, for us to do what we have done. But it would have been so much more appropriate and strengthening to the United Nations that a UN peacekeeping force should have been there in Saudi Arabia, rather than sending American young women and men to perhaps die there for a monarchy which doesn't allow women to do the kinds of things that our women are doing there, for a Kuwaiti regime which doesn't even allow women to vote. But there's no question a wrong was done. But we've had plenty of wrongs that we've been doing too. We have not been setting a good example with Nicaragua, with Grenada, with Panama. You just don't jump in and bomb people and go on, and then say, don't do as we do, do as we say. We need to have one moral standard and use it unanimously. We need to live by it. We have violence within our own borders here, violence against our citizens. I consider it to have hunger and homelessness, violence. And then we export that violence. We've got to change our behavior. I think we need a total UN-sponsored peace conference to settle the entire Middle East problem. It is doable. The people have been, there's no question, fighting back and forth for thousands of years. I think since we've gone to the moon, we can go to the peace talks. I think we have to change patterns, and we need leadership to do that. My turn? Okay, thank you.
Let me start by telling you that Liberty Union made a nomination yesterday for Attorney General and designated Liberty Union to receive the vote count, and today the Democratic Party endorsed that candidate. His name is Stuart Meacham, a resident of Montpelier. If anybody needs platforms, I have some older ones left. There's only slight variation, and I can explain it as I deliver it. I think most of them are out there. I'm a candidate of the Liberty Union. I may be the candidate of the Democratic Party as well after the recount. And I'm looking for people to help me with the recount. If you are interested in education, funding for medical care, conversion to peace, housing for the homeless, and I don't want to run through the litany that Mr. Sanders generally will provide for us, then you have to face the conspiracy that has just occurred, of which both Sanders and Smith are a part, in which they support the restoration of our budget to the control of the military-industrial complex for 5 more years. U.S. troops have already achieved that goal. The peace dividend has been shit-canned. I'm not talking in this context about rising prices and the prospect of recession. I'm talking about those other things that we had hoped for as the heat went out of the Cold War over the past year or so. One of the results of this marvelous conspiracy between the supporters of our military presence in what I call Southwest Asia. I don't use the term that's most commonly used here. Mid as related to what? Mid as related to far and to near. Far and near as related to what? Far and near as related to Great Britain. No thanks. Southwest Asia, please. For over 1,000 years, Mesopotamia and Persia were at each other's throats, except when they were occupied by somebody else. The presence of our military has brought peace and jihad. What a wonderful result to start with. For 45 years, a weak and frail country called Israel, for its security, has had to sell itself in many ways to U.S. international policy. The most latest, how does Israel get involved in the Iran-Contra affair? For currently, I suppose, in the neighborhood of $3.5 billion a year. To save its life. And now the snake, here was Israel, the stalking horse. Here was Israel, the point man, or the main man, and the snake was under the sand. Now the snake is on top of the sand. And what is that worth now? What will Orrin Hatch decide when he says, tighten the belt? All right, because the depression is here, because prices are up, because, and we got to put more money into the military. Is Israel worth so much now? Now that the snake is above the sand? And what a buddy we've made to take Israel's place. What a great buddy we got. Top man on our terrorist list. Assad of Syria is now taking the place of Israel as our best buddy to keep the Arabs at each other's throats. And that all comes about because some people, 2 candidates in Vermont, support the sending of U.S. military into a place where we have been able to keep out and at least keep the snake under the sand. It is my goal in the course of the next few days and weeks to see that all the candidates from the state of Vermont for the U.S. House form a united front to call for the withdrawal of U.S. troops as far as I'm from Southwest Asia. As far as I'm concerned, anyone who changes his mind between now and November 6th, that's retroactive to August 2nd. I will make no commentary from me. I want to encourage people to change their minds. I want the people around the country to see that everyone in Vermont, every candidate in Vermont is standing for that position. And you people can make it happen because some people can be persuaded to move if you tell them to move and if you recognize the seriousness of the situation that we have put ourselves in. Thank you.
David, I want to thank you and the committee and the congregation for hosting us here tonight. I've understood there are 3 questions that you've asked us. I have the great privilege of serving you as your congressman currently. I'd like to go back and keep doing it after the 6th of November. These 3 people think they can do a better job, and I think we're here to talk about it. And I'd like to address as directly as I can how I understand the focus of this evening, what my record has been, and what I think the Persian Gulf situation means for America and for Israel and for the Mideast. First of all, I think today what my concerns have to be and are when we think about not only Israel but the entire Middle East is the integrity of nations, is the sovereignty of nations, and a fundamental understanding that other parts of this world, whether it be the United States or the United Nations or anyone else, are not going to tell countries who have been created, however, how to solve their problems. That has been the history of the larger Middle East over its history. Continually new boundaries, new solutions imposed by people who felt they knew better. And that, in fact, there is a basis for mutual negotiations that will be respectful of existing sovereignties and existing peoples, and that as people understand what is an excruciating problem, and you know that far better, I believe, than the 4 of us. I can't speak for my 3 colleagues in this regard. But what we must do is understand that how we solve or resolve the issue of stability in the Middle East will determine to what extent it is successful and that solution stands the test of time. And that's hard for us sometimes, Americans, because we're impatient people. We want to see it fixed tomorrow. And so we try things, and then we try other things. This may take some time, but in the end it must be mutual, and it must be respectful. In terms of the past, and my position I think will emerge fairly clearly, I have understood Israel to be our ally, and among other allies in the world, but our strongest historical ally in that part of the world, and as such has been deserving of and continues to be economic support. I see Israel as, at this point, the only functioning democracy in that part of the world. Doesn't work perfectly, but There are those who say ours has a little improving to do also. But as such, I think it deserves our political support. And it is, yes, a strategic asset and has offered itself as such and engages in the defense and the preservation of stability as a nation in the Mediterranean basin and in the Middle East. And as such, needs and receives some military support from us, as do other countries. My commitment in 1988 and today is to a strong and a secure Israel, to mutual negotiations as the only way that ultimately we can have the long-term peace and stability with respect for the sovereignty of nations and peoples that we wish. As I've said, we can't dictate terms, and I believe that the Palestinian situation, as difficult and as deadly as it is, as savage as it is, can only be resolved finally by the countries who are involved speaking with each other on terms finally that are acceptable to the parties at the table, who are then the parties affected by what is decided at the table. My record in the Congress is there for all to see, regardless of how they feel about what I'm saying. I have been a consistent supporter of foreign aid to Israel and to other countries with certain stipulations in that part of the world. I supported the embargo of Iraq that was passed prior to the invasion and was able to see the significance I felt of the Glickman Amendment to the Agriculture Bill and to vote against it. And I have supported the foreign aid appropriation, and you deserve to know that. In terms of the Persian Gulf crisis, I see this as much more than being about oil or American hegemony or any of the more significant, but I think simplistic ways of understanding what is going on. I see it as being about one individual who has had the nuclear capacity before and would still have it were it not for the State of Israel, with aggressive vision of controlling not only Kuwait, but ultimately the Suez Canal, and I believe playing a major and pivotal role in the interconnectedness which world trade represents on this globe today. I understand that Israel, quiet as the country is in this crisis, plays an important strategic role even there on the north side of Jordan, and that there is a commitment outstanding on the table to participate along with the some 20, I believe, odd nations that are involved in an international, coordinated, United Nations sanctioned effort. Is that me or someone else? And I would tell you that I think the question, among others, that we must think through tonight and continue to think and to worry about, because this is that serious a problem, as to whether the analogy is with Vietnam or whether the analogy is with 1936 Europe. I pray God it's not the latter. But we are so capable of leaping again to those quick conclusions. I believe that what we have done in seeking international agreement and support of the United Nations is to try to put a world with one voice in to Saudi Arabia and to send the message to Saddam Hussein that there's a way to solve this in the short run, which is to go back to Baghdad and release Kuwait, which would then be followed by some kind of an international peacekeeping force, I would imagine. In my mind, that's the short term. It opens up another range of issues. Am I finished, or have I got a minute? I'm pretty well finished. But I believe that our policy, colloquially, has been to prepare for the worst and the most difficult, and to continue to hope and to pray for the best, which is no conflict at all. I think it has been an appropriate policy, and it is one that I continue to support. Thank you.
We thought what we would do now is give each candidate an opportunity either to clarify something, challenge another candidate on a particular item, or pass on the time. And it probably won't be the last of those. And maybe in the range of about a couple of minute period. So I don't know what order we can do this, and maybe we'll just go through alphabetically this time. And start with Peter Diamondstone, and then Bernie Sanders, and then Dolores, and if my alphabet is right, and then Peter Smith. Just a very, very brief comment, okay? And then we can go over the questions.
I heard mention of the sovereignty of nations and keeping smaller nations from being told what to do by larger nations. And our congressperson says that he's doing a good job, and I want to ask Peter Smith, why, when the sovereignty of Panama was at stake, and the larger nation telling another what to do, and the usurpation of the War Power Act, the war power that belongs to Congress, did you not begin impeachment against the President of the United States if you thought that the sovereignty of other nations was so important and that larger nations should not tell others what to do?
In effect, when the invasion of Panama occurred, I said that I supported it, and I think you know that. But I think there's a larger question here, and it is, frankly, whether one size and one response and one understanding of foreign affairs fits all situations. Quite frankly, Peter, as I understand, and I think if you read my record, especially with regard to Central America, to a deep concern about Nicaragua, which I voted, to an equally deep concern about El Salvador, which I voted. What I have tried to understand and to do is to understand each problem in the context of the politics and the culture and the world, and understand that they aren't all the same. That there is not a one-size-fits-all foreign policy or set of relationships for this or any other country, or for you and I or all these people in this room. Each situation is different, and I would simply say to you that the issue in the Persian Gulf, and I think it's fair to say we probably disagree about it, but I see the situation in the Persian Gulf, and I believe that the reason that the leadership of the world virtually is either aggressively on the sidelines or supporting through the United Nations and through the international action and financially opposed to Saddam Hussein, with the exceptions to date of Libya and the PLO, as far as I know. There is a reason. If the issue were simply oil, they'd do to us what they've done before, and what others would say we've done to others also in the marketplace of capitalism. But that is not the issue, and that is why world opinion at this point is Saddam. Were we there alone, I would have grave concerns about a unilateral presence. But the bottom line is, we're not only not there alone, we are there in the greatest integrated, comprehensive, international, multiply financed organizational force, I believe, in the history, in this century, certainly. So, one size does not fit all. I see the situations as different. When I believe this country is wrong, as with other issues, I've been willing to take on the president and stand against him and vote my conscience. And in this case, I think so far we are doing the right thing.
Am I correct in understanding the format would allow me not to ask a question,
Right.
just to make a brief
just
statement?
okay.
I rarely find myself in agreement with Mr. Diamondstone, but I think his point, his argument was not a bad one. In this sense, can the United States play a leadership role in the world in terms of public opinion, in terms of our presence in the United Nations, when we say we don't like the president of Panama, therefore we can unilaterally invade that country? We didn't like the leadership of a tiny little nation called Grenada. We can send them the Marines there. We did not like the leadership of Nicaragua. Therefore, we could strangle those people, sig the contras on them, torture them for 8 years. Okay? My view is that the United States of America does not have the right to unilaterally overthrow small governments around the world, often in Latin and Central America. The Soviet Union does not have the right, and now acknowledges it did not have the right to invade Afghanistan. And in my view, Iraq does not have the right to invade Kuwait. I think if there is any silver lining out of the crisis in the Persian Gulf, it is now the understanding that complex international issues are going to have to be resolved in the United Nations. And frankly, I congratulate President Bush for going to the United Nations. But I think what he may end up understanding is that the next time he and his friends think about launching an invasion in Latin or Central America, they may think twice after all of the rhetoric that we've heard about how large nations should not be invading small nations. What I want to very briefly touch upon now is my view of the Persian Gulf crisis, very briefly. Point number one, as happened in the early 1970s, the oil companies will use any pretext to raise their rates. They're doing it right now. They're ripping off the people. The government must act swiftly to prevent that. Number two, you'll recall that in the early 1970s, everybody in the early forget the early 1970s. You will remember that in the early 1970s, actually, right, people talked about the need for a new energy policy, that we cannot be dependent on Middle East oil. Remember that? We're more dependent on Middle East oil today than we were then. Clearly, we need major efforts towards conservation, new energy systems, so that for environmental reasons as well as political reasons, we do not remain dependent on Middle East oil or fossil fuel in general. Third point I touched upon earlier, we have got to move within the United Nations to stop the horrendous spending of billions of dollars funding armaments for third world dictatorships. Fourthly, and where I think maybe Mr. Smith, others will talk about this issue tonight, where we may have a difference. I believe what Bush did initially in sending military personnel to the Middle East as a defensive measure was correct. My concern now is that 140,000 soldiers later, I am getting a little bit nervous. Okay.
Good.
Clearly, our role there under the United Nations with multinational forces have got to be defensive. I think that's proper, along with economic pressure and diplomatic efforts. What I fear is that some people around the White House are concerned. You don't mind, do you, Peter?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, there's a guy waving a card at you over here for half an hour.
Okay. What my fear is that there are those who would like to use the current pretext to go to war, an aggressive war against Iraq. I think that would be a disaster.
One of the reasons that I would like to see a peaceful solution in the Middle East and a two-state solution, I think we need to have Israel standing on its own feet. I think there needs to be a Palestinian state standing on its own feet. And I think that we need to help the other countries in that area to get on with their economic development. I'd like to ask you, Bernie Sanders, a question because you mentioned there are 30,000 to 40,000 children that die each day around the world. $5 a year would keep them living. One half, a good half, of our total foreign budget, foreign aid allocations go to two countries, Israel and Egypt, to keep a balance there, to keep a fighting kind of balance there. If you were in Congress, would you continue to have this number of children dying? For example, in Africa, each average citizen would get $1 a year from us as it stands now. That's not talking about other parts of the world. What would you do to bring about a better use, I think a better use, of our foreign aid monies?
It's a very fair and excellent question. Clearly, I think we are now giving Israel $4 billion a year. We are giving Egypt significant sums of money. We are selling armaments to third world countries around the entire planet, dictatorships. Clearly, it is absolutely imperative that we reduce the amount of military aid we're giving not only to Israel, but to Egypt, but to all of the Arab countries, and more importantly, not just the United States. It is absolutely incredulous that when 30,000 children starve to death a day, the Soviet Union continues to heavily fund Syria, that France plays a major role selling weaponry all over the third world. As I indicated earlier, what I believe has to happen, and I would love to see the United States initiate that effort, is to bring the world powers together within the United Nations and say, stop the funding, the military funding of the third world countries. Let us use that money in order to improve the economies of the third world, develop new economic relations between the first and the third world. We want money to prevent the starvation, to build the schools, to build the health programs, not to give them AWACS and sophisticated weaponry to kill each other. So that's what I think.
Well, I think it's time to get to some questions. I got lots of good things to say here.
Well, if there are any questions, there might be a couple from the floor. If you're associated with the press or media of some sort, would you please identify yourself? Are there any questions? I'm sorry, yes, I can't see. Yes.
Yes, I'm Stephen Shaw from the University of Vermont Jewish Action Coalition. And I'd like to ask each of the candidates, I know this isn't an issue that's discussed anymore in the press now that Iraq has invaded Kuwait, but to each of you, what is your position on the question of a Palestinian state in the West Bank? And furthermore, how have the recent events in the Middle East, namely the invasion of Kuwait, perhaps altered your opinion on this question?
Maybe we have a minute each.
Yeah, it's altered my opinion, and that is, it's better happen a lot faster than we had. You know, we always thought there was going to be some time to negotiate, but now that Israel is not quite so valuable anymore as a partner in our policy in Southwest Asia, at this point in time, I think that Israel has got to move very quickly for peaceful land, although that's been my position all along. And I think that negotiation has to go on, must go on with the PLO, and that has got to happen in a hurry, because I don't think there's going to continue to be the same kind of flow of money there that we've had up until this war. And one tag on that, I think it's perfectly legitimate for that piece of land which was ripped away from Iraq somewhere between 1899 and 1921 by process, finally in 1921, and turned into an independent country. I think it's perfectly appropriate, not for the use of arms, but for that property to be returned to Iraq. Now, that means maybe some bargaining has to be done to let that happen by plebiscite or let some other process go on, but that land is Iraqi land, and it always was. So let us not misunderstand it. This is like Ireland trying to get back Northern Ireland from Britain. This is like if was it Colombia or Venezuela that we ripped Panama off to create a nation of it. That nation had tried to get back the land that we ripped off in the first place to create the Panama Canal. This is not, and that's the only deep water port in the Gulf, and that's why Britain did it. All right, so we are not talking about no just claim here.
As I mentioned earlier, I have called for a two-state solution to the Middle East crisis, the original part of the crisis, you might say. The greatest tragedy, I think, of the Middle East is the aspect that the British have played in bringing about this tragedy, in that they lied back during the period when they were under the mandate. They lied to the Zionists, they lied to the French, they lied to the Arabs. They lied to themselves, and it's really only just now, as some of these files are coming open and scholars are looking into it, we're seeing the depth of this chicanery that occurred and the tragedy that has ensued. As I said earlier, both states need to be supported. And the greater tragedy that is now occurring is that that whole area may go up in flames. I do believe we need to move as quickly as we can to bring peaceful discussions and a peaceful solution to that area.
What we're hearing is what we, and I think I answered your question generally, but I'll try to get a little more specific or explicit. All of this is about what we're going to do to them, wherever they are. Now, what I tried to say when I used the term mutual, that in the end, the solutions here cannot be imposed, but must be created by the participants. And I don't think the issue is whether we in this room or in this country, I happen to think most people would like to see what is called a two-state solution somehow, but it isn't going to happen any way other than the people that are there who are failing to communicate. I think Israel has effectively, since 1967, been in a state of war. Egypt, where more than 50% of all the Arabs in the region live, was able and courageous enough, with the leadership of our President Carter in Camp David 13 years ago or 14 years ago, to begin a process and stand alone, and they still stand alone, as difficult as that has been. I think what the Persian Gulf crisis tells us and confirms to us is that it is a dangerous neighborhood, that in fact it is not going to be simple, and that if we have, as I put it earlier, respect for the situation as it exists today and as it has evolved over the last 40 or 20 years, depending on where you want to start, the 45 years or 20 years, start the clock ticking. We must finally respect it as it exists today and understand that the principles there are going to solve it if and when it is solved together and mutually, and the terms will not be dictated by powers from outside of the region. And that's what I was trying to say in my opening statement, and I believe it. In the end, if we want a quick fix, we can try something else. But if we want something that will stand the test of time, and I see the security and the stability of Israel as being the rock in the middle of this, then in fact, that's the way it has to be.
Very briefly, number one, it is not a debatable issue to me that Israel has the absolute right to its territorial integrity. It is a nation. It must be allowed to exist, and that, I trust, is not a debatable issue. I believe that in the long run, a two-state solution, in fact, might well be the most reasonable out to the very volatile situation regarding the Palestinians. I think you asked a good question, is how does that debate stand now after the Iraqi invasion and after Yasser Arafat's support of that invasion? I think that clearly the credibility of the PLO and Yasser Arafat has taken a marked turn downward as a result of the support of the invasion. And I think that probably in Israel it becomes harder for those people who are members of such organizations as Peace Now or the Mapam Party, the left wing in Israel, as opposed to Likud, who in fact have wanted to negotiate, have wanted to reach out, have wanted to come up with some solution. Their position now becomes much more tenuous because of Arafat's and the PLO's support of that invasion. It makes it that much more difficult. Peter just mentioned, I think, a truthful point, that ultimately the solution to the problems there are going to have to be resolved by the people in that area. I think that's true. But it goes without saying that a nation like the United States, which puts billions and billions of dollars into that region, obviously has enormous influence. My hope is that the United States government, as it cuts down military support all over that region, for Israel and the Arab countries, as it tries to bring serious debate within the United Nations, will look toward some of the people in Israel who are not ultra-nationalist, but the people in Israel, of which there are many, who are trying to bridge the gap between Arab and Jew. And I think that if the President and the Congress can move in that direction, a solution might come about that much faster.
This question is to all the candidates. Because of the Middle East crisis, I see there are a lot of Asians and other non-whites caught in the middle. And they all have become refugees, 100,000 and more than that. And I don't see any mention of this in this country. What you people have, what kind of opinion you have, what you want to do about it.
Are you, sir, talking about refugees in Kuwait, refugees in Jordan,
I
all
think
over?
in between, somewhere in the desert,
Well,
and everybody is dying like animals there.
I think first of all, you're beginning to see not only international but national organizations begin to organize. There's nothing we can do for refugees who are, frankly, hostages in Kuwait. That is up to Saddam Hussein. And I don't know what we can do other than continue to, through diplomacy, urge him and encourage him and pressure him to set those people free. For me, the most chilling specter of this whole now month, 5-week episode, crisis, was the pictures on television with him with the children. It was just chilling to me. And so in the end, we need to understand that in this country, whether we gather in Temple or we gather at the neighborhood bar or in somebody's living room to talk about things, that's something we can all have our opinions. But in that situation over there, and as refugees and the people who have escaped have made it very clear, he calls the shots. And he calls the shots the way he wants to, and he calls the shots with brutality and with finality. So inside Kuwait, I don't know if there's much we can do other than continue what it is we have tried to do. In terms of Jordan, I think the International Red Cross and the United Nations and other nations are beginning to help, and I think it's going to have to be an international effort.
It's interesting that we call Saddam so brutal, but the killing of 2,500 Panamanians is not so brutal. It's interesting, I mean, all the invasions and activity, the 30,000 dead Nicaraguans is not so brutal. And so on. And we paint this guy as we always paint our opponents as ogres, but how are women treated there as compared to other Arab countries? How come they got socialized medicine in Iraq? I mean, that's better than we got. For a brute, that's not bad. And I think that the effort should now be, with regard to those folks that you mentioned, who I presume you mean those who were in the channel crossing Jordan, that the effort should simply be to put the guns down that the United States is carrying and take care of those people. I mean, we've got plenty of food there. We've got plenty of water there. There's no reason for anybody to be hungry or without. Put our guns down and take care of that and get the guns and the soldiers out and the refugees back to their home countries.
There is a ratio. I haven't figured it out yet, but how many lives of people of color have to be toted up in comparison, on balance, to one person, Euro-American, European background, and then we add that way. And that's the problem of the desert. Thousands can be stranded there, and we talk about the 10 or 20 who stayed in the luxury hotel, or 100 or 200 who stayed in the luxury hotels. Guests, but nevertheless, they weren't out on the desert in the cold. They weren't hungry. And those countries who depended so greatly on those credits that their workers sent home now are even going to be in more desperate straits. We talk about third world. We really don't talk about the fourth world and the fifth world that are out there. Those are the countries that didn't make it as third world countries and have slipped back. Those are those people. And their role in all of this picture has not been really discussed at all. That's the despicable aspect, that we are so concerned about our hostages that we don't care about all those other individuals who are the children's brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers of families. Have we not all one Father? It's in Habakkuk. And that's the way I approach the world, and that's the way I approach the problems that we face. That's why I'm concerned, just as you are, about those individuals who've been left out on the desert and their countries are so poor. Not only can they not send food, they don't have planes, they can't charter. But yet we send our planes back and forth. It's been suggested, why on one of our return trips didn't we pick up some of those people and drop them off at home? This kind of thing. No, they are ciphers in the sand. And that is our foreign policy, and that's what I want to change, and that's why I'm going to Washington.
You correctly talk about the tragedy of the refugees from Kuwait and seeing them suffering in the desert. Probably, if I may just extrapolate from that, what is going on in this world today, and I would say that the American media deserves extreme condemnation for this, is that not only is there suffering there, which today is not being discussed, but the suffering and the death in the third world today is unhistorical. It has the degree of death and of starvation and of economic misery because of the third world debt, because of the general economic conditions. The fact that third world countries aren't able to sell their products for a decent price. What you're seeing in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, are an entire people who are being brought to their knees. There are countries now where children, even in Mexico, are growing up with mental retardation, generations, because they don't have enough food to sustain normal physical or mental growth. So you ask, I remember teaching in Hamilton College in the spring and having kids do research papers as to how much Time and Newsweek put in to the coverage of third world starvation as opposed to the life and times of Donald Trump. And you know what the answer was? This was before his divorce, when he really got the news. Far more attention was paid to Donald Trump than to the Holocaust, and I use that word advisedly in a temple, in the third world right now.
I'm R.D. Eno. I represent Pari, the Jewish news magazine. I'd like to ask a three-part question of all the candidates. In Congress, would you support continuation of foreign aid to Israel? B, would you support forgiving loans to Egypt and some $10 billion in loans to Israel? And C, would you continue, in the absence of any international agreement, to stanch the arms flow to the Middle East? Would you support continued arms sales to Israel? Would you support the continuation at present levels or higher of foreign aid to Israel? Would you support forgiveness of the Egyptian loans and the Israeli loans? And would you support continued arms sales to Israel in the absence of any international agreement to stop the arms flow into the Middle East generally?
In another temple 18 years ago up on Prospect Street, Bernie gave that answer: no more guns for Israel. No more guns for anybody. And we have been calling for that for a long time. No more guns. And the Liberty Union platform that you have in front of you is a nonviolent one and says no more war. And we say that the way that war and preparations for war are part of that war, and of all war. And we say that that's got to stop. And we, as now the principal arms merchants of the world, we have now taken the substantial lead over everybody else. The responsibility rests with us. As for the loans, I have some problem with lumping them both together. Right? The loans to, at least that ought to be on parity. That is, if I remember rightly, one is very large or 3 times the size of the other. At least we ought to be willing to talk about that if we're going to forgive one for one. My objection for giving the Egyptian loan at this particular point is that it looks like it's simply part of buying their support in the war against Kuwait or against against Iraq in its effort to regain that portion of its country that was ripped off by Britain, known as Kuwait. As for the foreign aid, I have no objection to continuing ordinary foreign aid and would like to see that continue, but I advise that those days are drawing to a close as Assad and Syria assume the role for the United States in causing the trouble that Israel was once bought to do and can no longer do because, we know that they have been begged into silence. Don't get into this one, right? I think that kind of silence is forever, and I think that the snake on the surface now means that it's going to be hard to keep that aid flowing. Very, very difficult. As people say, we have to pull our belts in.
Well, the first part, would we continue? Would we support would I support the continuation of foreign aid? Obviously, we just can't cut the cord, and we have to work this out. This is a whole part of this settlement process, but that's why I feel it needs to be gotten underway and as quickly as possible. The second part is what I support for giving the loans of Egypt and Israel. Well, we have used Israel as a club over the Egyptians' heads, and we have used the Egyptians as a club over the other Arab countries' heads, so I think it's only right that we should forgive the debts because we have been using both of them. What we have been doing has not been good for either of them. A peaceful solution, a supported solution, will be good for everyone in that area. Would I continue to support arms sales? Well, according to the Jerusalem Post, the Pentagon spent more to buy Israeli military equipment in 1989 than the Israeli Defense Ministry itself, up from $9.4 million in '83 to at least $350 million in '89. About $1 billion worth of Israeli military goods ordered in previous years was, quote, in the pipeline, end quote, to the U.S. in '89. The U.S. runs an annual $300 million deficit in commercial military trade with Israel. I agree with Peter. We need to stop all of this military trade. That drugs and military goods should be the 2 largest commodities traded on the world market, and we should be a part of that, is a scandal. We need to be, and because of this whole Middle East crisis now, we have set aside any thought of cutting back of our Pentagon spending on the military-industrial complex support. We need to be diversifying ourselves into peaceful directions, and we should be helping Israel do the same. We've gone down the wrong track. We need to turn around.
As I indicated earlier, the fact that the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and other countries are pouring and have poured billions and billions of dollars into the Middle East, arming countries against each other, to me is total insanity. And I think it is absolutely appropriate for the superpowers of the world under the aegis of the United Nations to begin to sit down and talk about major radical cutbacks in military aid to the entire region, simultaneously to all countries. And I think given the ending of the Cold War and the fact that the Soviet Union is working with us in this crisis allows us the opportunity to do that. Very important issue. In terms of the forgiveness of the loans, I think we have 2 problems. Number one, as you know, there is a $3 trillion debt, $3 trillion national debt right now in the United States. And I think that rather than simply forgiving third world loans, what really has to happen is there has to be a new relationship between the first and third worlds, first and second worlds. What goes on right now is that we have serious economic problems in our own country. Our own people are not producing the products, creating the jobs. We're not creating the jobs because, among other things, many third world nations simply have no money in which to buy products and to trade with us. So I would tie the whole issue of third world debt into a new economic relationship between the first world and the second and third worlds. Thirdly, I am a supporter of foreign aid when it serves economic and human purposes, and certainly would support those goals.
Artie, I need to ask one clarification. Just my memory is that the debt in Egypt and Israel is roughly the same. Peter said it was 3 to 1.
I think it's 7 billion with Egypt and 2 billion with Israel.
No. Israel. 10 billion with Israel. I'm not
8 or 9 with Egypt. Okay, I thought they were much clearer. Thank you. Bernie said something which I think bears going back to, and I think he was right. Stunned silent. He said that there was no basic disagreement about, finally, at the bottom line, whether we were going to support the sovereignty or the integrity or the security of Israel. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but there was a statement that, in the end, was fundamental. What I have to add to that is that means something. Those aren't words that then just fly out this room and land in the field. Those words mean something. And what we need to understand and continually worry about and work at is giving those words meaning, while at the same time doing everything we can to bring that region to stability and ultimately to peace. And there's a connection between those two things. So to answer the questions, which were pretty clear, yes, I would continue foreign aid to Israel. Yes, if we're going to, I would say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I frankly have some concerns about forgiving the Egyptian debt. So I have to cross that bridge first. But were we to have that as the policy of this country, the answer should be yes. And third is yes. Absent an arms agreement, absent the accord that we would all love to see, which is, again, not what we're discussing. It's what we'd like to see. It's what is real now, and how do we get from where we are to where we want to go and get to, and how do we help those people decide where it is they want to get to and assist them to get there as a region and as countries and as people. I would say it does not fill my heart with gladness to support arms sales to anyone, but yes.
Maybe what we do is have a couple more questions, and then maybe you'll have a minute or two to say something at the end. I saw these 2 hands here before.
I'm Nick Hanks with WAMC Radio. The peace dividend is evidently off the books now. Peter Diamondstone spoke eloquently on that particular item very succinctly. How will you vote in the question of defense and military spending cutbacks in the next 2 years, if you're elected on each of you?
Come this way.
No, I don't agree that the peace dividend is gone. I think, there are some people, clearly, militarist-type people, who will tell you, given the crisis in the Middle East, we've got to increase military spending. We still need Star Wars. We still need $700 million stealth bombers. We still need all kinds of submarines, which no one thinks are necessary. No. The extraordinary event of the last several years, Persian Gulf or not Persian Gulf, is the Cold War is over. Stop for a moment. Gorbachev last week met with Bush. They are on the same side. Virtually all of our military spending since World War II has been based on the possibility of a world war with the Soviet Union. It's over. East Germany is now part of West Germany. Lech Walesa and friends are running Poland. Havel is running Czechoslovakia. My own view is that we can cut military spending by 50% in the next 5 years without lowering in any significant way our ability to defend ourselves. If we develop a progressive tax system in this country, we could raise significantly more monies. So I refuse to accept that there is not a peace dividend with the end of the Cold War. There is a very substantial peace dividend, and we should not let The right wing in Congress tell us otherwise.
Well, one of the great joys, of being a congressman is you get to go down there and vote. And I just urge you to stay tuned. Some of you may like what you see this week because we're going to start voting tomorrow. We're going to vote until midnight. We're going to vote on the defense budget in the United States. I voted against it last year because I thought it didn't make any tough decisions, and I thought it was riddled with fraud and waste. And fraud and waste loses us two or three ways. You get bad product, which means bad defense. You waste the money to begin with, and we need it for other programs. We've already cast votes on burden sharing, sending a very strong message to the Japanese and the Filipinos and the Europeans that we're not going to pay their bills anymore while they eat our lunch internationally and economically. Those days are over. We're working on it. We're not just thinking about it. We're not just talking about it. We're moving. Now, in terms of the peace dividend, it's getting a little scary. I agree with Bernie. I might shake out some of the rhetoric a little bit, but the bottom line is the question before us through the budget summit or regular debate on the floor of the House and the Senate is not whether or not we will reduce the defense budget, but how much and where. And those are the issues that we must be focused on. We know more clearly today than we may have 6 weeks ago that the world is still a dangerous place. The nature of the danger has changed, or we see it differently. But the challenge that faces us as policymakers, and that's what the Congress is collectively, as a policymaker, is to understand if these have been our assumptions for the last 45 years about the security of this nation, what is right with other nations for the world, where the security threats lie, and those assumptions are no longer appropriate, what are the new assumptions? So that we are moving from one place to another place with a plan. It's not just as simple as cutting the budget. It's a matter of understanding what kind of force structure do we want? What do we want them to be capable of doing? God forbid they've got to do anything. What kind of weaponry? What kind of diplomacy? What kind of economic arrangements with our historic allies in Europe and in the Far East? So we need a plan, and we're working on a plan. Specifically, I will tomorrow vote to, I believe it'll be tomorrow, to stop all production of the B-2. Not a matter of giving you joy or not giving you joy. I don't think we need it. I don't think it'll work. We'll vote to again cut SDI for the same reasons. I think it still has some value as for research. Other people disagree, but it will be cut, and I think it will. Either MX rail or MX fixed, or both will be either eliminated, or one will be eliminated and the other will be reduced. And we will begin to look at the redesignation of forces and troops in terms of what the emerging security threats are, so that we are basing our actions on knowledge as opposed to simply emotion. It's going to happen this week. It's going to be a difficult debate. I think it's informed by what has happened in the last 6 weeks, but peace dividend isn't gone. But I think the point has been made clearer than ever. We need to be very thoughtful and have reasons and purposes for what it is we are doing, and not simply whack away at it.
Well, it's my understanding that economically the peace dividend was never there because it's borrowed money anyway. So consequently, unfortunately, it's not there for a variety of reasons. That, plus the fact that our economy is so much based on the manufacturing of armaments, military goods, that we just can't slash because that throws whole parts of our country out of work. So we have to do this in stages that we should have been planning and working towards perhaps at least a decade ago, so that we were more diversified. I mean, it was Jesse Jackson who 2 years ago said that we were selling missiles, and who's buying missiles? People want to buy TV sets, so they're buying Japanese and German TV sets and cars. So that's the kind of thinking that needed to have been in place long ago if we were to have a peace dividend. Then the other aspect is, we've been moved out of Europe because of the end of the Cold War. NATO is no longer needed. So really the $3 billion that we're just getting from Germany to help in the Middle East seems to be shipping costs to move our troops to a new NATO place. Cheney just said that we have to have a NATO in the Middle East, but before we had NATO geared and armed towards the Soviet Union. I mean, we'll be right there on the Soviet Union border again, but if the Cold War is over, why are we there? We just can't bring those people home, right? So therefore another way in which the peace dividend is not there. I personally think we'd have a much greater peace dividend if we had controlled legalization of drugs, taxed it, provided treatment, had education, looked at why we had the demand, and used that money in our economy. But we have to do away with all this Star Wars kind of thinking. We have to decide what we want for our country that's appropriate for a great nation, which includes the kinds of programs for health, for homes, for education, for hunger, all those kinds of things. That would be a real peace dividend. We just have to decide now and start working towards it. But as it is now, we'll have a depression if we just cut, unfortunately. We should have been thinking ahead of time.
Sanders said something about Gorbachev and Bush being on the same side and all the ones in between. And that really has brought me, I mean, not just from his remarks, but seeing it happening, makes it really clear to me that there isn't a first, second, third, fourth, that there's two worlds. There's first and it's white, and there's a second and it's not. And in my view, that's what's going on. And that's what Kuwait is all about, and that's what the hate for Saddam Hussein is all about. And my friend Smith says we can't go with an axe at the budget of the military, and it's painted on my car. Zero war budget. It's been there a long time. Zero war budget. Taxes for child care. Taxes for adult care, nothing for warfare. And we have to do that. It's not a matter... Bill Meyer formed this party in 1958, the Liberty Union, and I don't know if you remember him, but he got elected saying unilateral cessation of nuclear testing, and the year was 1958, at the height of the McCarthy period. Right? And now we have this other pressure, and maybe Mr. Smith and others will go and stand for cutting the budget. But the voices of the military, but the voices for war are louder than ever. And that's because it's convenient, you see, because they're not the same color as we are. And they speak different languages than we do. And I think that's really what war now is all about, now that the white world has got its act together.
Hi, Josh Mangus here representing the Russian Herald. My question is, I've heard each of you to varying degrees speak of a two-state solution to the Palestinian question, however, and a negotiated one. However, the question is, how do you get the parties to the table, and do you favor using U.S. aid to Israel as a means of leverage to get Israel to the negotiating table?
Yes, I have said just that I do favor using the foreign aid because it is of utmost importance. And my real concern here is that what has happened to Israel over the past decade plus in the policies that have been promulgated, that we have seen on our television sets and people around the world have seen on their television sets. 1985-86, I was on sabbatical in Brussels, and it was at the time of the bombing of Libya and at the time of Chernobyl. And we had a lot of support for our bombing of Libya. But at the same time, it was because there was so much terrorism going on in Europe and people had this tremendous concern. But what was shocking and upsetting to me was also the amount of talk that I heard from people in varying walks of life that was really anti-Israel. And I haven't seen the kind of respectful statements that I would like to see about a country such as Israel. And that's what's occurred over the years. And that's why I think it's very important that steps be taken. People have looked upon Israel as, in so many ways, sort of like a phoenix rising out of the desert over the years. And in the past few years, as we have seen the brutality that has occurred, with no real movement other than a continuing process of hate, that's not, I don't think, the way that Israel should be thought of in the world. And the votes in the United Nations have shown that. And I want to see that changed. And if it's necessary to use foreign aid to bring about a change, then that's the way we have to go. But I think that we need, if we're to be a mentor, to be a positive mentor. And I've said also that the support needs to continue until that Israel can be on its own. It's been 40 years now. Israel is not a state of the United States. And there's a lot of negative feeling in a lot of parts of this country about the problems that are being faced here in this country where there aren't monies to solve those problems. I think positive solutions can come out and must come out for Israel and for the Palestinians. And that's what we must do to work to bring that about. I don't know if there are other possible ways, but we have been talking for a very long time, and we have been ill-using, I think, Israel in all of this. And I'd like to see it stop. I'd like to see a positive image reemerge for Israel.
What it doesn't seem that people are aware of is that from the point of view not only of the government of Israel, but also many people in Washington, our country's diplomacy with Israel in the last year and a half has been very tough, very tough. But one of the things we don't do is give credit for or try to understand what the purposes of that diplomacy are in a conversation like this. I need to backtrack for 1 second and say, when we talk about cutting the defense budget, going back to what Peter Diamondstone said, the voices will be louder because people are afraid. But that is the reason why being thoughtful, having a plan, knowing what you're doing, knowing where you want to get to, knowing what is at stake, being prepared and having thought it through is more important than ever. Because if we don't know where we want to be, we don't know where we want to get to with this new budget 5 years from now, we don't know what we want it to do for us and for the world, then in fact we won't know when we have it and we won't know when we get there. I think Pat Leahy, I don't know how many of you were at the APAC meeting, the Vermont APAC meeting a year ago, but I thought Senator Leahy made an extraordinary speech that day, in which he said that Israel, I think in bluntest terms, must learn how to risk for peace when the time was right. I thought it was an appropriate speech. I felt many of the people in the room at the time felt it was an appropriate speech. But again, the point is, that is their determination as a nation to make. I think we will continue to keep pressure through foreign policy, through foreign aid, on Israel and the entire region. But no, I would not, in a unilateral fashion, participate in cutting aid to one antagonist, if you would put it that way. You did not, but if it were put that way, to one side in a state of, some would say declared, and others would say what has been a state of undeclared war for more than 20 years. I would not be part of that kind of a solution as an appropriate kind of pressure to put. I think we need to put pressure. I think there are other ways to do it.
I trust that everybody up here with me will concede that the issues in the Middle East are enormously complicated, and nobody but a fool thinks that there is a simple solution or that there is one evil protagonist in the region. As I've indicated earlier, I have, as somebody who is Jewish, by the way, I have deep concerns about Israeli policy toward the Palestinians. It is not pleasant to see on television Israeli policemen beating up children. I have deep concerns about Israeli involvement in running guns to some of the worst governments throughout the world. That's not what Israel should be doing. But on the other hand, I am not naive enough to believe that all the other countries surrounding Israel are wonderful, democratic countries who want nothing more than peace and brotherhood. They're very nasty people in that region, countries that have invaded Israel, leadership in the Arab world that has sworn to destroy Israel. the gentleman over in the corner asked earlier, in terms of the relationship between the PLO and Israel. What's the impact of events in the last month? And it's a serious impact. How easy is it for the people in Israel, the pro-peace people now, to say, yeah, let's sit down with the PLO after they have supported Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iraq, of Kuwait? Makes that much more difficult. To answer your question, Josh, I think that given the fact that the United States and the Soviet Union and France are putting so much money into weapons in that region, they do have leverage. They really do. And the insanity of putting more and more weaponry into the hands of people who could explode against each other and start a world war, if not a nuclear war, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think the United States can play a leadership role within the United Nations of saying to the arms merchants of the world, let us stop arming the protagonists. Let's bring them together. Much better to give them money for economic development and for food and for education than weapons. So I think the United States can play a role. I would like the United States to be playing a role within the United Nations to, in fact, not unilaterally, but multilaterally, lower the amount of arms that are coming into that region. Thank you.
Would you use foreign aid as a mean, the threat of reducing foreign aid as a means of getting Israel's?
I would use the threat of reductions in military aid to all parties. Military aid to all parties, absolutely.
But not to Israel specifically.
Not to Israel alone. You see, the point that I've been trying to make all evening, I have serious problems with Israeli behavior. I have equally serious problems with the behavior and attitudes of many of the Arab countries. I think you've got to go forward in both areas and not just picking out one country.
I think I said that earlier, that I'm not willing to use foreign aid as a club. But the club is going to happen because that which Israel has to offer to U.S. international policy has much less value now. And when Mr. Smith says that the people in Congress and the people of our nation are afraid, they are afraid because Mr. Smith and Mr. Sanders support the military occupation of Saudi Arabia and perpetuate that fear by saying that's a necessary thing. There's a domino theory about to happen, that they're going to go from Kuwait, and nobody talks about the legitimate interests of Iraq in Kuwait as opposed to any interest it might have, which would be illegitimate in the lands of Saudi Arabia. And there is one evil in the region. I beg to differ with you. There is one evil, and when it used to be the snake was Britain, now it's us. And that is, for me, fundamental, that it is we who foment that anger. It is we who feed it all to avoid pan-Arabic affiliation. It is we and France and England and so on, but it is our policy fundamentally. It is our policy to keep those peoples from uniting and working cooperatively together. I mean, isn't that why we're so upset about Kuwait? Because Kuwait was feeding us cheap oil, violating the OPEC agreements, overproducing with respect to its quota. Isn't that why we're so upset when it comes to the issue of oil? Right? Because we want to keep them divided and broken up. Right? Not only from the point of view of oil, but from the point of view of their economic development, from the point of view, because then they might even want more money, more of a share. They might even develop their own refineries, and we might have to buy it that way. Shell oil won't get the raw material and then make the profit for turning it into something we can use. I disagree with the fact that there is no one evil in the region. It is us who has been using Israel in this way for 45 years, and only because it is so frail, and we are the one who keep. I mean, Fouad and Saud and Assad, we love it, right? And that keeps Israel on the edge of its seat too, so that it has to come and fawn to us and do the duty that we instruct it to do.
I think that what we need to do is simply say that in the event that there's going to be a peace settlement, that we'll put the troops, we'll protect the Israeli security with the troops that we have now in Saudi Arabia, that we'll agree in the United Nations to keep troops there to protect the Israeli borders when that agreement is reached.
It's Sunday evening, and we've been going for quite a while, and I know people are going long ways to travel, and so I think maybe I'll try to give each person a chance to 1 minute final remark, keeping in mind that brevity is the soul. Why don't we do in reverse order, so whoever was one is before is once, or whatever.
It's Old Testament, isn't it? Hebrew, oh, close. Yeah. I think this has been an excellent hour and a half, and I want to thank you, David, again, and all of you who are here, and the committee in the Temple that made this possible. It's been one of the best discussions that I have participated in 12 years of seeking office, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, in this great state. I think I've made my points clear, and I understand that in making them clear, I did not please everybody in this room. But I think you deserve to know where we stand, and I have to tell you that I have, I've tried to give you the reasons for the record that I have put together. I've tried to tell you as clearly as I can what I will do in the future, because I believe if you understand what it is you can expect from me specifically on other issues or on these issues in the future, as we talk again, you will feel comfortable accepting what I say and understanding that what I say is what is going to happen. There's an election in 2 months, 8 weeks. I'm standing in front of you as one who has been not only a fighter for Israel, and I have been, and I'm proud of that, but a seeker of peace and stability in the Middle East, who understands that everybody must risk for peace, and that somehow all of those things must work together if there is in the end going to be peace and stability in the Middle East. And I would ask you for your support on the 6th of November so we can go forward together. Thank you.
I believe that the reason why there's war is because the wealthy never pay for it. All right? And what happens is we pay for it, and so they don't care whether there's war, and they can use it as their own tool. And the reason that they never pay for it is because there are some people who have so much power over their income that no matter what we do with taxes, we can't affect it. For instance, DeBakey is a heart surgeon. We double his taxes. He'll double his fees for heart surgery. You raise the taxes on Canseco, the ball player, and he'll get $10 million instead of $5 million. You double the taxes on Lee Iacocca, instead of $27 million, he'll get $54 million. They never pay. That's why they don't care, and that's why they can use this tool we call war. And the way to stop that is to say, at some level of income, we will have a 100% tax on everything over that. And that figure will go up and down depending on the war budget. Like, you might get to keep everything under $100,000 or have it taxed if we have a $300 billion war budget, but if we have a zero war budget, you might get to have that 100% tax come into effect at $150,000. And you watch how fast there's an end to war.
It's been a while since I've been in a temple. My first job in Gary, Indiana, was secretary to the rabbi of a Reformed temple for a year and a half. I always said it took a man of the cloth to accept my shorthand and typing skills, but I was putting myself through school, and I very much appreciate the opportunity, as I said earlier, to have this discussion tonight. I'm very concerned, as I've stated, about the way in which we interact with people around the world and within our borders, and I see our domestic policies as reflections of our foreign policies and vice versa. I agree with what Peter Diamondstone has said about how we want the situation in the Middle East to be just as it is. It's to our benefit that the conflict is there, and that's a terrible part of our history that someday perhaps we'll read. But right now, we aren't really being informed, just as we aren't being informed in this country of the very active peace movement in Israel. And I realize also that given the circumstances with what has occurred with Saddam Hussein in Iraq and the problem with Kuwait, that is obviously upsetting to those people who have worked so hard in Israel to bring about a peaceful solution. We as Americans need to do all that we can to reinforce that peaceful movement and to reinforce the peaceful interests within the Arab countries there. There are 22 Arab countries. We tend to forget 75% of the Arabs and Arab lands are on the continent of Africa. We tend to think of just a little portion. We have terrible stereotypes about people. We talked about the yellow peril in World War II. We have other stereotypes about Arabs. I don't believe in stereotypes. I've been a victim of stereotypes. My family, my friends have been victims. I don't accept stereotypes for peoples. So I want to see peace. I think we can bring about peace, and we owe it to everyone to do so. Thank you.
Peter Smith and I agree there will be an election on November 6th. We do disagree as to who you should vote for. In truth, though, probably the most important reality of November 6th nationally, not in Vermont where we win, but nationally, is that the estimate is that 65% of the American people are not going to vote. As you know, when Bush defeated Dukakis, 50% of the American people voted. We now have the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized democracy in the world by far. The most important reality of this campaign, and I say this over and over again with the deepest sincerity, the American people, especially working people and poor people, are giving up on the American political system. The problems facing our nation are enormous, and yet the people no longer have faith that the Congress, 99% of whom get reelected, are capable of dealing with the reality of people's lives. Economically, you all know, the richest people are becoming much richer. Poorest people are becoming poorer, sleeping out on the streets. The middle class is shrinking. You know that we are one of two nations in the entire industrialized world that does not have national health care, which says finally that if you're an American citizen, you're entitled to all of the health care that you need, and you don't have to pauperize yourself if you're an elderly person to get into a nursing home. In terms of the discussion that we've had tonight, especially now that the Cold War is in fact over, my dream is that this nation becomes the leader in the world, not in selling weapons, but in making peace. We are a great nation, and we should be using our strength now to work with the third world so that the children do not starve to death, to stimulate new economic development relationships, to cut military spending significantly. We have an opportunity right now that a decade ago people would not have dreamed of. Frankly, we need a totally new direction in Congress, a totally new set of priorities. We need to bring people into the process. We cannot allow corporate PACs to continue to buy politicians from one end of this country to the other. We need a political revolution in this country. That's what this campaign is about. And I very much appreciate your support on November 6th. Thank you.
Just want to thank you all, the candidates, for coming this evening, and we hope to see you at the polls on November 6th.